Good evening, this is Quintus Curtius, and welcome back to the podcast. It's been a few days since my last podcast, so I wanted to check in and provide an installment here to let everyone know that we're still alive and kicking. And, I heard a great dialogue tonight, and some of you may have also listened to it. This was a dialogue between Roosh V and also Paul Elam, the founder and organizer of Voice for Men, a men's rights organization, which listeners may or may not know. But it was a very interesting dialogue. You've got two men coming from different philosophical positions, similar in some ways and differing in others, but each of them had a chance to showcase their different views of the world and describe how they differed from each other and how they had similar beliefs. And there were times when I really felt like I wanted to jump in and offer my own opinion, because in many ways I didn't feel like there was that much of a gulf between the two positions. I felt like really it was just a matter of stages of one's life and how people's views and priorities and ideas and perceptions are going to change as one gets older. And if I can just grossly summarize the arguments of the two men without doing too much violence to their essence, I would do it this way. I would say Mr. Elam's position really was emphasizing the virtues of restraint and forbearance and prudence. Basically, he was saying in a nutshell, hey, if we give advice to guys, we should be not really pushing them forward too much into the celebrating their sexual excesses and adventures. We should really be emphasizing the virtues of prudence and caution, because if you make missteps when you're young, if you do things that hurt yourself, you're going to suffer permanent and severe and lasting damage. And this is certainly very valid advice, and it's the type of advice that one would expect who has a lot of experience, just I'm sure from his own interaction with members of his organization, experience with people who have been, severely harmed by the court system and by the prevailing culture in the West that punishes and marginalizes men. So this is a perfectly valid position and certainly something that everyone should hear and needs to hear. Roosh's position really was coming more from the neo-masculinity side of the fence, which is also the worldview that I have also subscribed to in many ways, which basically is simply just a modern form or an updated form of traditional masculine virtues, updated for the modern era and for the circumstances in which we live today. So that's really what neo-masculinity is in a nutshell, if you read it and process what we've written about this worldview. In any case, Roosh's position really was coming down to this: we should encourage men to celebrate their sexual identity, to get out there and to seek self-improvement in all areas of life, whether it's physical fitness or whether it's starting businesses or in work or in life or relationships, whatever. And learn your lessons as you go, make course adjustments as needed as you go forward. And in so doing, you will automatically learn the lessons you need to learn as you go through life. So those are the two views. So then the question becomes, well, which man is right? Or are they both right? Well, I think the latter answer is the correct one. I think they're both right. I think they're both sound. They're both offering sound advice, but advice that may be appropriate to different men at different stages of their lives, or when such men are subject to different circumstances in their lives. So there's nothing, I don't really see any conflict between the two positions. It really just comes down to a matter of how you view the world. And in fact, I think both are offering prudent advice in certain situations. To summarize, to grossly simplify, we could say that Mr. Elam is emphasizing the virtues of prudence, caution, and restraint, and Roosh is maybe emphasizing with neo-masculinity the virtues of daring, of enterprise, of initiative, of those positive, maybe aggressive virtues, or more what we would call traditionally masculine virtues, which would be appropriate to a young man, which is the type of virtues and concepts that young men need to be cultivating, because when you're at a young age, you need to be getting out there in the world. You need to be collecting experiences. You need to be going forth and conquering and doing things that young men do. Frankly, I think men of all ages need to be doing that, but it's especially true at a young age. All right? And anyone who's familiar with my writings knows that I also share those beliefs, that I think men of all ages, not just young men, but maybe especially young men, need to be getting out in the world, need to be getting out in the arena, learning their lessons, and making course adjustments as they go. So you've got these two different virtues, the virtues of initiative, aggression, and enterprise on one hand, neo-masculinity, and then on the other side you've got the virtues of prudence, caution, and restraint. And again, I don't see any conflict between these two. We need both. A man needs both. And the analogy that I like to use is the analogy of the car. And a car has two pedals. It has a gas pedal and a brake. The positive, more masculine virtues of neo-masculinity we can see as the gas pedal, which drive the machine forward. And the brake is maybe more the virtues of that Mr. Elam was emphasizing, the cautionary, prudent restraint, which act as a brake to prevent the car from spinning out of control, from driving too fast, and from maybe going off the road. So you need both. A car can't operate without a brake pedal and a gas pedal. You need both. You've got to have both. Without the two of them, when a car only has a gas pedal, it has no way to restrain itself, and it will quickly crash and destroy itself. And if a car only has a brake, then nothing happens. So we need the interaction of both. And again, I think it really just comes down to a matter of age, of where people are at in their lives, and really just a matter of perspective. It really just comes down to a matter of perspective. But I thought the dialogue was important because it also brings up the question of the relativity of virtues. The relativity of virtues. And what I mean by that is this. The things that we consider virtues at one time were probably also vices. And for example, what I mean by that is, we commonly count certain things as vices, things like selfishness, greed, gluttony, acquisitiveness or acquisition. We count those modernly as vices because in a modern social setting, living in a society, someone who is greedy, selfish, self-centered, and aggressive is not going to be able to get along with other people in society. But there may have been a time, maybe in man's primitive stage, in the hunter-gatherer stage before the agricultural or industrial stage of development, when these traits were actually virtues. If you were a hunter stumbling around the Kenyan savannah maybe 1,000,000 years ago, you didn't know where your next meal was going to come from. You maybe had to go days without food. You had to maybe trek long distances with a hunting party to search for game. You were entirely dependent on your environment, your physical environment, and so therefore you had to be aggressive. You had to be greedy. You had to eat to your gastric capacity of your stomach because you didn't know when your next meal was going to come along your way. And you had to be aggressive and clannish and selfish to keep away other tribes, to keep away other scavengers and marauders from stealing your kill. So anyway, my point is that virtues can be relative. I think what we can say from Roosh's and Paul Elam's discussion was the virtues of youth may not be the same virtues as those of old age. If we saw a youth who was excessively cautious, restrained, and prudent, I would argue that one could almost count those as vices rather than virtues. If a 20-year-old man is too afraid or too timid to go out in the world and go forth and try to make his way, then I think that's a vice, not a virtue. In the same way, an old man, a man of 60 or 70 who's excessively ambitious or greedy or acquisitive or has any of those traits that we would associate with a younger man who's just starting out in the world, we could probably say that he's also afflicted with a vice, the vice of frankly, of not knowing his position in life. A man of that age should be adopting a more seasoned, a more prudent, a more restrained outlook on life, because by that age one will have suffered, loved, lost, made fortunes, lost fortunes, and maybe knows a lot more about life than a 20-year-old man. So you would expect a different perspective on life, and that's simply common sense. So this is an important thing to keep in mind, the variability and the relativity of morals. The variability and relativity of morals. What were once virtues can now be vices, and vice versa. What were once vices could now be viewed as virtues. And as I said, and just the opposite is also true. What we call vices and virtues really are dependent on what stage of society we inhabit. The hunter-gatherer stage of mankind's existence, which was very, very, many, many eons ago, the hunter-gatherer stage had its own set of vices and virtues. Then when man moved into the agricultural stage of civilization, that stage had its own vices and virtues as well. The agricultural stage saw the development of the hierarchical patriarchy system of social organization, and that persisted for a time. The industrial stage had its own set of vices and virtues, and maybe we're in the post-industrial stage, and maybe that has its own set of vices and virtues as well, which we're still trying to sort out. And maybe that's why there's so much turbulence now in the world, is because we're in that transition phase between two eras of human history, the transition between the industrial stage, which saw the use of organized religion to sustain and promote morality, and now that's decayed, and now we're in maybe a post-industrial era where we're still trying to sort out what the new rules of the game are. So these things are important, but I do think that Mr. Elam did not give us enough credit when he said that we don't emphasize enough the virtues of restraint or prudence or caution. I think anyone who's read a lot of our writings, I know in my books I've written many articles on virtues and ethical and moral problems. That's one of the major focuses of what my writing is all about, and we talked about it ceaselessly, frankly. I can just recall many articles I've written on how to behave and what is the right way to do this or the right way to do that. There's been many articles that not only I've written, but other people have written on what constitutes a good mate, a good wife, a good partner. So the wise counsel of prudence and caution is out there. It is there. If only one is willing to find it and seek it out, it is there. But I think his point is well taken, that one needs to have both the gas pedal and the brake. I mean, there are many historical figures, and the first one that comes to mind is Alexander the Great, who had nothing but energy without any restraint. And a man who operates only on energy, only on instinct, only on impulse, is quickly on a road to ruin and is quickly going to be able to destroy himself without learning the virtues of caution and restraint. So we need both, and hopefully we can appreciate both of these virtues and continue to cultivate them in ourselves and reflect on them when we read, when we watch movies, and when we interact with other members of our family or co-workers or lovers. So anyway, that's what I thought was, I think, the key point that I gained from the discussion between Roosh and Paul Elam. And I'll repeat it again. I like to use the phrase, the variability of morals, or the variability of virtues. And the idea that what is right in one stage may not be right in another stage, or to say it another way, one needs to have all of these virtues in oneself. One cannot subsist just on one set of virtues alone. And that's something that I think we can all reflect on and we can all agree on. That will wrap up this podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. It was brought to you courtesy of Fortress of the Mind Publications. I'm Quintus Curtius. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes again and rate the podcast on iTunes. It helps other potential listeners to find me and get the message out there. So I would appreciate if you do that. And until next time, I'm Quintus Curtius. Good night.